Do you really want to go to that toxic boss who's like all over you and enmeshed and like super codependent in a way, and like it's just constantly showing up, boundary violating into your office? No, you pull away from that boss. Do you want to go to the toxic boss, equally as toxic, who's like completely checked out and doesn't barely even know your name and definitely doesn't know anything about what you've done, and you feel like you're on an island, i.e. the detached parent? No, you don't. So when we get this right, it fosters and beckons our child to come to us, as well as, of course, we can go to our child, and it really sutures us together in a healthy way. But just want to make another pitch for flying at the right altitude, is it reduces our kids' anxiety. Because guess what? They get to learn they can handle things on their own, and it expands their resiliency. Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with Thomas Miller. Are you tired of your tweens, teens, and young adults' negative behaviors and poor choices holding you emotionally hostage, controlling your family, and ruling your life? If you answered yes, then you are in the right place. This podcast is a community for courageous parents just like you who come here to gain effective tools, skills, and take action so they can change their tween, teen, or young adult's life and improve their family's future. Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with your host, Thomas Miller. Today, we're going to talk about flying at the right altitude. This is probably one of my favorite topics because if you go back to, if you're an OG to this podcast and been listening from the jump, the first one was owning your circle of control. And then I don't know which number it was, but an early episode was, are you a pot roast or fried chicken? They're all kind of similar, but they're so uniquely different. So circle of control is obviously about what can you control, what can't you control. Pot roast or fried chicken is about how fast are you parenting, right? Are you quick to parent or slow to parent, or quick to react or slow to react? And today is, what altitude are you flying at? And this is probably, like I said, one of the biggest challenges and the most common use of my time as a parent coach, because I coach parents with every kind of situation you can ever imagine, not just even age, from, of course, tween to teen to young adult, but co-occurring issues. That means addiction and mental health, to neurodivergent issues, learning differences, developmental challenges, what have you, all rolled into one, right? There's families I work with that have a child who's on the spectrum and may have, mental health, or a kiddo that has trauma and some really challenging learning differences. So we have to always look at, are we flying at the right altitude? Because if we're flying too low, we're creating compression on our kids' growth and development. If we're flying too high, we are aloof. And unfortunately, so often the parents that I work with, who I've coached for, 20 some odd years. And of course, the parents now for the last 2 years, since the Four Peaks Parents Program has been kicking some booty and alive and well, they tend to fall in one of these two camps, where they're either extremely aloof or detached, or they're either extremely enmeshed and codependent. There could be some people who are in the middle, of course, but more often than not, we tend to vacillate into one or the other, I should say, of those extremes. We can visit those extremes sometimes, but we obviously don't have to stay there. And today we're going to get into how the heck do we fly at the right altitude. And by the end of this episode, not only are you going to have greater situational awareness, you're going to understand a lot more about the negative impact that flying at the wrong altitude can pose to your child's greater good or ultimate growth, as well as we're going to look at how, right, do we avoid those traps, and then how do we figure out, right, what is the right altitude and when, so that we can really be masters of zooming in, zooming out at the right time, and also to the right degree and with the right dosage. So for me, it's all about seeing the greater good of your child's development. Like, if you think about it, it's so hard. So many of the parents I coach, they get so mired in like the now, right? Like their child is struggling with impulse control, and they're very focused, understandably, on trying to behavioral shape or help that child have better behavioral modification, or their child, let's say, has social anxiety or could be on the spectrum and really struggles with initiating social interactions or social situations, and they're really focused on that. And that's great. And we want, right, to help that child in a very proximal way be able to bring value, right, and move that needle. However, we have to always look at the ROI. And one of the funny things when I coach parents and I'll say something like, hey, this issue if left alone can metastasize and will look like this at 21 or 29 or whatever. And so often the parents, even though they're working with me and I've brought them tons of value, they're like, how do you know that? Or how can that be true? It's just experience, people. It's reps, right? So when I work with a family, it's really neat because I get to literally go from, every hour of my life or my day is pretty much going from a failure to launch system, right? Where there's a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, 23-year-old, 25-year-old still in the house who's struggling to step fully into adulthood. And then my next client, will be maybe an 11-year-old who's kind of running roughshod all over the classroom and that family and has ADHD, and maybe there's some entitlement there and a real lack of, again, impulse control. And maybe even, the child is a bit grandiose, right? And then my next client could be this super introverted, depressed, teen. Of course, I'm working with the parents and the family. So you got to toggle all the time. But the value of basically me having a passport and hour by hour transitioning to different cultures, family cultures, I get to see what this stuff looks like. So if we don't get this right, if we fly at the wrong altitude and are meshed and create compression, that is not going to look good in the 20s. If we also are detached now, that ain't going to look good either, or it ain't going to look good at any points, honestly. If you have a 20-something at home who is smoking a lot of pot, let's say, maybe has a job, barely has a job, right? And we're now aloof and detached and looking the other way, hoping that will get better. Avoidance creates more avoidance. That's not a good look either. So let's dive in, right? Let's have this whole conversation really based on trying to find the perfect balance between involvement and over-involvement. And it's not just involvement versus over-involvement. It's involvement at the right time, to the right degree, for the right reason, to the right dosage, or vice versa, right? There's nothing wrong with active ignoring, right? We talk about that all the time in the Four Peaks Parents Program, right? Active ignoring, planned ignoring, those are intentional choices. If your child's behavior is, let's say, attention seeking or inappropriate, or they could have OCD and they're seeking reassurance, they could have anxiety and are be constantly info gathering, what's next, what are we doing later, whatever, right? We don't want to meet those behaviors with attention and create Velcro to those behaviors, because that will further, right, promulgate those behaviors. But again, we want to do things in an intentional way. We want to stay out of these poles, the North and South Pole, where I'm always overly involved or I'm always underly involved, if that's even a word. I don't think that's a word. Or I'm not involved, right? It has to be, each situation is going to determine the tact, the approach, the strat, etc. Okay? So let's look at what a child can gain from flying at the right altitude. I mean, there's a cool ROI here, right? Like, that's what we're playing for here. I always say to these families that come in and they're like, so, oh my God, you should see, I mean, you've probably all been there, right? They look stressed out. They're ready to rip, each other's throats out. Everyone's fighting, and you have an oppositional, defiant teenager when each parent hates each other, or maybe not hates each other, but is struggling to have compassion toward each other, and they're split, and they think the therapist sucks, and the therapist thinks they suck, and the principal hates the teacher, and the teacher hates the priest and the rabbi, and whatever, right? That's a really manipulative kid that's working that system so much so that everybody's kind of exhausted, right? And so flying at the right altitude and figuring that out now, right now, today, has so many benefits. So it boosts the child's confidence and esteem that they can solve things independently, right? If we fly at that right altitude. If we're flying too low, right? How the hell can they internalize, like, damn, I just figured that out. Like, I got through that. I did break up with this girl. I did advocate for additional time because that's in my IEP. I did confront that bully. I did go to the party. And I did relapse, which sucks, but I learned from it. Now maybe I do have to get into an NA or AA room, right? Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. I'm talking about older person. As much as that sucks for that family, if of course they put so much into that child's recovery, but we can't stay in a model that if you have a kid that used to vape or used to smoke pot or used to drink heavily, you can't stay in that model where they're never entering the world again. So again, my thing all the time when I first start working with families, as much as they're like, how do we just get through today? And they obviously want strategies, and I give that to them immediately, right? That's why it's 4 peaks. The first peak is the family audit. The second peak is emotional mastery, where they become the masters of their emotions so that they can choose, right, how to think and feel as opposed to those feelings choosing their choices for them. Third peak, upgrading their toolkit, right? That's where we really get into adding those amazing tools so you're not a one-trick pony. And then lastly, rewriting your family story. But the reason we go through those peaks is so that we can play for big games. I'm not just playing to like help a family, have their child not vape or not cut anymore or not self-harm or something or not be manipulative, right? We're playing for bigger games where one day we are dropping off that teen at a party, obviously not the party where everyone's passed out on the lawn and it's a crack den, but drop them off at something they've earned, drop them off at that concert, drop them off at that city and allow them to sort of fail forward. The second thing that we want to understand about why flying at the right altitude is so important is it's a great way to help your kiddos develop problem-solving skills, right? And exhibit critical thinking. Like, how the hell are they going to get this crap, right? If we're flying at the wrong altitude, if we're detached and aloof and we don't have the sex talk or we don't express our expectations regarding drinking and drugging or vaping or academics or work, if we don't expect them to get a job and we're just like looking the other way and taking the super laissez-faire approach and telling ourselves this story that we're an effective parent because we're doing like a free range parenting, free range parenting is there's a lot of intentionality on the front end. There's a lot of front loading. There's a lot of being clear as to what you expect and hope, but then yes, letting go. And there's all these different, trends that have come out over the years, Tiger Mom, free range, this or that, right? Helicopter. So for me, again, it's all about shifting gears, shifting modes. Another thing that we really want to understand is if we get this right, if we fly at the right altitude, it encourages independence. And we want to gradually give kids independence, right? It's not like we just throw them in the pool one day and like, hey, figure it out, hope you can swim. Or like, hey, here's college, right? Because think about the freshman dorm at college is probably the highest risk, place potentially because you have all these kids that are now having to have the internal controls and there's less external, right, controls and less external structure. And they struggle, right? They struggle to inhibit, right? And manage and modulate and self-regulate and have, internal limit-setting abilities around drinking, drugging, what have you, partying. So when we find this right balance, it also builds trust. Like, think about it. Like, do you really want to go to that toxic boss who's like all over you and enmeshed and like super codependent in a way and like, it's just constantly showing up, boundary violating into your office? No, you pull away from that boss. Do you want to go to the toxic boss, equally as toxic, who's like completely checked out and doesn't barely even know your name and definitely doesn't know anything about what you've done and you feel like you're on an island, i.e. the detached parent? No, you don't. So when we get this right, it fosters and beckons our child to come to us as well as, of course, we can go to our child. And it really sutures us together in a healthy, healthy way. The other thing that, and last and finally, and then we'll get into like, how do we do this, right? But just want to make another pitch for flying at the right altitude, is it reduces our kids' anxiety. Because guess what? They get to learn they can handle things on their own and it expands their resiliency. And again, you can't hypothetically get resiliency. Like I tell families all the time, like you can't like go get it on Amazon or Walmart or Target, right? Not Target, or CVS, right? It has to be earned. It has to be kind of fought for. Your child has to build that over time. And those micro failures and micro wins, believe it or not, inoculate your kids against the bigger challenges that are to come down the line. So if we're not inoculating and desensitizing them early on and giving them these opportunities to fail forward and to stretch and to tear and then repair, which is a couple episodes back, shows back here on this podcast, then how the hell are they going to have resiliency in their 20s? Brief little comment. I hear a lot from families, when they talk about their 20-something who hasn't launched, their 20-something will have FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, or imposter syndrome, right? A lot of made up terms, right, from our society. When you really boil those things down, especially imposter syndrome, it's really that the tasks of their life, the age appropriate tasks, they're 23, they're 24, they're 25, they're 21. The age appropriate tasks, what life is asking of them, they feel ill equipped to step up to that challenge and demonstrate said efficacy. They don't have the efficacy of that thing. They don't have the competency of that task. And so they have anxiety. So rather than doing two things, either oversimplifying the hell out of the task and basically shrinking it to a place that meets their current competency and starting, right? Or rather than Googling, what are the competencies, what are the hacks, what are the skill sets I need for said job or said thing, and leaning in, they will just avoid. And now you have someone who has anxiety that is gradient. Their anxiety is gradient, as in connected, germane, relevant, to the degree to which they are underprepared for the adulting that's needed in this moment. But that was created way back when, people, because more often than not, the failure to launch had a lot to do with what I just talked about, is that family didn't put their loved one, their child, in uncomfortable situations, didn't ask them to grow, didn't fly at the right altitude, were probably way too proximal, doing way too much for them, fighting way too many battles, and in doing so, each and every time, robbing that child of their own mastery, their own self-efficacy, their own agency, their own just sense of like themselves, or chutzpah, right? To use a Yiddish term, such a great word. So let's look at the extremes real quick, just so we know what we're talking about before, so we're leaving from the same station. I want y'all to know, when I talked earlier about the extremes of flying at the wrong altitude, right? These are what I always see. I see the detached parent, right? So it's really dangerous, right? It's really, really, really has a deleterious impact on a child when there's a detached parent. It really has a shunting effect on that child's social, emotional, psychological development. Because think about it. You may have even had one of these parents. So I don't need to tell you, and I'm sorry if you had a detached mom or detached dad, right? Then if this was your childhood, when you think back to your family of origin, if your parents were emotionally distant and uninvolved, right? I mean, think about the messaging there, right? I'm sure each of you felt, damn, like, what the hell's wrong with me, right? Why am I not good enough? Or why, what do I got to do, right? To get them to be interested in me, right? So that's a recipe for all kinds of unhealthy behaviors to get displayed to get that detached parent's attention, because they're uninvolved. And that child is going to struggle to develop a secure attachment, which is basically the building blocks of their sense of safety, self-worth, and self-esteem. Having a secure attachment is the healthiest or the greatest protective factor and one of the healthiest factors in determining someone's success. So we don't want to be a detached parent, obviously. And again, my heart goes out to you if you were raised by one and you know what that's like. And so let's be mindful, which happens a lot. We as parents tend to swing the pendulum so hard in the opposite direction of whatever the hell our norms were as a child. So we don't want to go from having been raised by a detached dad or mom to now becoming an overly involved, enmeshed, codependent dad or mom, okay? But that's just important. And again, those children that don't have that deep, deep, secure attachment, they're going to be kind of like hung out to dry more often than not. And they're going to have challenges forming intimacy, healthy relationships. It's well as even managing their own emotions, because they don't have that guide. So we don't want to go there, okay? We don't want to go there, right? You don't want to send the message to your kids that your child's emotions and needs don't matter, right? We know that. I don't think you're listening to this podcast because you're a detached parent. You're listening to this podcast because you want to be a more effective parent, right? And so if you even lean toward detachment, good job, right? Being on this podcast, so now you can lean in a little more, right? All right, let's get into our enmeshed parents. Where are y'all at? I bet there's definitely some enmeshed parents listening right now. It's okay. Put your hand up if you're driving or you're brushing your teeth or you're just listening while you're cooking or something. Put your hand up. Own your enmeshment, right? Only way to change is to own our shit, right? We got to start with us. Got to take accountability. So this is equally as negative. Will create as equally as a negative dynamic as, say, detachment will, because the child and the parent become one. It's called emerged identity. It's so obvious when I get an enmeshed mom or dad, because they are literally going through every single thing their child is going through. That's different than witnessing, accompanying. That's not a secure attachment, right? That creates an anxious attachment, and often an insecure attachment as well. So it leads to an unhealthy level of dependence in that child, where the child, no matter what their age, is going to struggle to develop a sense of autonomy and personal boundaries. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's go back to what I said about that imposter syndrome. It's why we're seeing so many 20-somethings, i.e. failure to launch, because those kids were not pushed as hard as they should have been early on to step into those uncomfortable places, to develop the mastery to meet the challenges of that 13-year-old phase or 15 or 16-year-old phase, right? Now you got a 22-year-old who internally is experiencing a shit ton of shame because they know they're not ready. They know, left to their own devices, they don't have what it takes. And again, rather than saying and really honestly developing a plan, which I absolutely can help you with, and I do this every day, immediately, first thing we do is have a family meeting. We audit, where the hell are we? How did we get here? And then immediately we create an action plan to get out. And involves that young adult. I meet all the time, even though I'm coaching the parents, I always involve the young adult into the sessions. And we'll just be very frank and be like, all right, cool. No one wants to be here, right? You don't want your parents up your ass and having these conversations because you feel infantilized. But guess what? Your lack of competency, your lack of ability right now today to go and face the fact that, let's say, you aren't employed or are partially employed, or you are halfway through a degree, or you took a medical leave. Don't get me started on those, by the way. Not a big fan. More often than not, the medical leaves turn into basically gestating unhealthy norms, because I'm going to go home to my super comfy bed and I'm going to go back to the place that I've already navigated so effectively toward my manipulative kind of norms. You know, if I was that young adult, I already manipulated the parents in high school. I sure as hell am going to be able to do it now when I'm 20. And that medical leave that should be actually treatment, or should be some kind of experience to give me the tools, give me the chutzpah, get me back on the horse and get back to college, again, turns into semesters, and then it turns into just one more piece of evidence as to why I suck, pretty much. And then it continues to gestate out basically a culture where there's low accountability across both sides, on both the parenting side and that young adult side. So we don't want to do that, right? We do not want to do that. We want to help, especially if you're listening, you have a tween or a teen. Think about the ROI. Think about the return on investment of the work you do today. You fight some of those battles today. You die on that hill today. You try to exhaust some manipulative boundary pushing today. Then we're getting gains later on, right? It's all the work we're doing now has a compound effect, either positively or negatively. So again, we do not want to rob a child of the sense of autonomy. The merged identity is it's like a noose, if you really think about it, around that kid's neck, squeezing oh my God, the resiliency and health out of them. And it puts a lot of pressure to meet the parents' needs. I mean, what I don't think a lot of parents understand is that when you're in this enmeshed, merged identity with your kids, you're basically imprinting upon your child that your wellness is their wellness, is their responsibility. So no wonder they have anxiety about separating and individuating, which is the primary task, because unconsciously they have to worry about mom or dad and make sure that mom or dad is okay. And it's just too much. It's too much. They don't have the bandwidth for that. And they become overwhelmed. And more often than not, they kind of get paused. It's like hitting a pause in their own development. It's like, just they don't know where to take a step. And now they have anticipatory anxiety and they're in conflict about the primary healthy developmental tasks of teenagehood or tweenagehood, right? They don't want to take that step forward because unconsciously they're worried and they're guilty about taking that step forward because it's been set up vis-a-vis that enmeshed dynamic that, again, they have to take care of the parent. So they become excessively reliant on that parent too. And the irony of those parents, I already know I have an enmeshed parent in like 5 seconds when they're complaining all the time about everything they do. Well, they're playing the masochist. They're keeping that child in a reliant state, and then they're complaining about the litany of things they do. When in fact, if they just stopped and really leaned in and started with that circle of control, our first episode on this podcast, one of the first exercises we do in the Four Peaks Parents program is look at what the hell do we control, right? And then there's so many other tools and skills that I give the families, but we got to start with us, people. Like, responsibility leadership starts with us. So if I'm doing all these things for my kids and complaining about it and getting all this sympathy, I'm actually playing a really unhealthy role in promulgating an enmeshed dynamic and robbing my child of the responsibility that they need to meet the demands of their developmental tasks today. So, and if we're stepping in too quickly, the child is never feeling uncomfortable, right? We're preventing them from feeling discomfort, right? And what a missed opportunity that is. All right, so now what the hell do we do, right? So now you got the landscape that not good stuff in either of those extremes. And again, my heart goes out to you if you were raised by an enmeshed parent or a detached parent. My heart goes out to you if you're dealing with a divorce and, there's now a step parent or there's your ex or whatever, and one's super detached, right? I mean, how many families have I worked with where there's a divorced family and the one parent is like, why the hell am I working so hard to set up, that one night a week they're supposed to have dinner with the kid? And they're doing it because they think that's a huge loss for the child, but they're kind of like basically making that parent perform, and they're doing all this grunt work, right, to set that attachment up for success, which unfortunately is clearly not there because that parent, mom or dad, is modeling a detached stance. On the flip side, we don't want to, right, compensate like we talked about. And if you're parenting from a really healthy, secure, balanced place and your ex or your co-parent, still married, not married, is either detached or meshed, it's tricky. It really is tricky. But we got to really focus on the program we're running, right? Because again, it's all about the greater good and setting our kiddos up for success so they can meet the challenges that are the primary developmental tasks per that year, per that phase, right? We want our kids to be able to handle everything that tweenagehood is going to throw at them, everything teenagehood is going to throw at them, and then obviously, college or whatever they're going to do in adulthood, so that they are able to step fully into adulthood, that we don't have a failure to launch situation, right? Which is just feels horrible for everybody. Again, that young adult that I'm in their life, I say it all the time, as much as a lot of young adults immediately like me, which is awesome, because I'm like really good at connecting with people and we'll talk to them about whatever, right? Their passions are to hook them in. But I'll then always like pivot and be like, let's be real. Like, you don't really want me in your life right now, do you? And they're like, no. And I'm like, but hey, right, buddy, we got to own that I'm a representation of the work you haven't done. And this whole like hitting the pause button and staying in this homeostatic world of video games or pod or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is, or just living vicariously through someone else's story on Instagram, that's keeping me in your life. And your parents are here because they struggled, right, to present a united front and to really be clear on clear with those expectations and ask you to do hard in a really clear, concrete manner. So it is what it is. Let's all roll up our sleeves. And then together we build that program that I started speaking to earlier, where they will have to have clear, what are called KPIs, right? Key performance indicators, or clear deliverables. They have to get a job. They have to pay rent. They have to be engaged in some kind of educational pursuit, right? Otherwise, we're running a sober living or structured transitional living program, right? Which is not healthy for us as parents. We shouldn't be wearing those hats. That's not our job, right? All right. So what the hell do we do? So the first thing right now, okay, I frame for you what those norms and dynamics look like. Your culture has to be balanced. Your relationship with your children has to be balanced, has to have that perfect balance of involvement, right? And non-involvement, right? We don't want to be overly involved or underly. I'm going to use that word underly. I don't know if it's a word. Underly involved, okay? We got to set boundaries. And come on, who wants the 3 gold stars? Who do you set boundaries with? Wait for it. Wait for it. Bueller. If you said ourselves 3 gold stars, give yourself a nice pat on your left shoulder. That was great. We set boundaries with ourselves. So when we see our kids struggling, we have to set a boundary like, hey, I'm choosing not to address this because, right? Or I'm choosing to address this because, right? If our kid, again, is on the spectrum and obviously cannot, I wouldn't even say, let me finish the statement, advocate for some issue, let's say with their IEP. I don't even know that that's true. It depends on the situation, but we can coach them. We can role play with them. We can involve them in an IEP meeting, depending upon their age. We can do some parallel process work where maybe they can't advocate to the entirety of that whole situation because they're not an educational lawyer and that's too much pressure. But we can give them some role where they advocate. We can be proud that they shared that with us. We can commend them and have them write some kind of letter, and we can go represent them, let's say at that IEP meeting at the school. Let's say it is, again, a kiddo with extreme generalized anxiety, and there is a quasi-bully situation. Do we have to immediately jump in and fly super low and go have a meeting with the principal and the superintendent? It depends. Let's talk to our child about how that's impacting them. Let's validate their emotions and where they're coming from. Let's appreciate them for coming forward and sharing that with us, right? Ask a shit ton of open-ended questions. What have you tried already? What do you want to do about this? What role do you want me to have? Do you want me to get involved at all? These are great ways to empower our kids, right? With our young adult. If our young adult is 25, especially if they're smoking pot, especially if they're unemployed, if our young adult is 21, I would immediately want you to start thinking about, and they're living at home, where are we going? What's the plan? What's the timeline? What happens next? We don't have to be, again, applying for the jobs for them. That would be flying too low. We don't want to be looking the other way and be completely aloof, but similarly as well, let's come alongside like, hey, how's it going? Do you need any support from me? Do you have any ideas? Have you reached out to, this or that network, whether they went to college or not? Do you have a LinkedIn account? Do you need to know a little bit more about LinkedIn? Happy to show you. What are some things you're thinking about? How's things going? So we can coach, we can motivate someone for change, but we do not need to be flying so low and be applying for the job and writing the freaking resume. You could offer, hey, I'm willing to sit down with you and review that college essay if you'd like. I'm willing to sit down with you and check out your resume. I'm willing to do some role play. Let's say they want to be an entrepreneur. Let's do an elevator pitch. Let's say, it's a teen and they want to talk to you about how to ask this person out or how to break up with this person or how to chop this friend, and that relationship. Great. But you're not going to do it for them, right? If you have a tween and they feel like they're being bullied, again, we have to kind of take an exploratory approach to that. We have to get more data. We have to learn more. It would be very disempowering if we immediately called the parent of that kid and probably very embarrassing to our child. On the flip side, if our kiddo is ruthlessly being bullied and it's really inappropriate, sometimes we got to take it out of their hands and we got to go, immediately, right? Get a lawyer, get involved with the superintendent and or the principal. So it really depends, okay? So we want to stay out of like assuming this is always how we operate. So we set those boundaries first and foremost with ourselves, then we set them right with our child. That way it's like, when this happens, I know I'm going to do this. We need to encourage age-appropriate challenges like I talked about. Let's start chunking those down. What is the challenge that your child is avoiding? How can we provide that for them? It could be so simple. It could be taking the trash out at night, if they have some anxiety. It could be making a meal once a week, which is great, right? Which allows them to have sweat equity. It could be pushing them, right, to order some food on the phone. The other night, my youngest, when we were ordering some food, he handed the phone to me. I handed it right back to him. He looked at me like I had 10 heads. I was like, figure it out. That's not me being cruel. That's not me being detached. I'm, right there alongside with them. I know he can do that. I'm not going to go and order the food for him and fly too low and rob him of the assertiveness and that awesome win. He did a phenomenal job. I knew he would, even if he had screwed up royally. Who the hell cares? Let's say we got different food or whatever the hell it is. That's okay. That's okay, right? So we want to constantly give our kids these little challenges to inoculate them over the long run against challenges, right? Let's be emotionally available. Let's listen, okay? Let's listen, but we don't have to take on their emotional package, right? If you have a dramarific teen, everything is like on a scale of 1 to 10 and 11. We don't have to feel exactly with them. We can listen and we can say things like, that sounds really hard. Thanks so much for sharing. Sorry you're having such a hard time with that. That does sound difficult, right? But that doesn't mean we have to be exhausted and dramatic and keyed up and ready to fight somebody, you know what I mean? Because they're going through something. We want to present a little bit of a different emotional kind of response. We can match them and empathize without going through it. The other thing that's so important, if you have a co-parent, model some healthy relationships. I say this all the time to the parents I coach and all the parents in the 4 Peaks Parents Program. It's okay to have healthy conflict in front of your kids. Like, how the hell do you expect them to learn, right? So like if you feel like, one parent is all up in your stuff, it's okay to push back and do that appropriately. If you feel a parent is super detached, you can call them out on that. Again, that's not splitting. And that's not about emasculating someone or putting someone down or being hypercritical or shaming someone. But modeling healthy conflict for kiddos is great. We also have to be mindful of our own emotional needs. This is like so paramount for every parent I've ever worked with, myself included, is if you really think about it, when we're stressed out and exhausted, what do you think where do we tend to go? We go to one of these extremes, right? So some parents will be detached because they're just fried and they're just checked out. Some parents will actually enmesh when they're exhausted because that's their proclivity. And they have 82 spinning plates going on and like, oh, cool, give me that 83rd. That one looks nice and shiny, right? Sometimes enmeshment comes from you just need to be validated. And we want to be careful that we're not, again, using the hooks of guilt with our kids and seeking, so much validation. But there's nothing wrong with being like, hey, that was really rude. I worked really hard on this meal. You don't have to like it, but you can't speak about it in such a disparaging way. Or, you know what? I would like a thank you, or I would like a thanks, mom, instead of a hey, brah, right? I would like some, acknowledgement. That's someone who's really doing a nice job of modeling, right? Healthy respect for self, setting a boundary, and also is going to then take care of themselves. Please, 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 please increase your self-care right now. Every parent, myself included, needs to do that. And last but not least, to get out of these damn extremes is we got to foster open communication and create an environment where our kids feel safe to express their thoughts and feelings, right? We listen, we validate, we avoid, right, taking on their feelings and or personalizing them. We don't have to run away from whatever the hell's going on, nor do we have to run into it and be so enmeshed and merge with our child that we prevent them. You can do this, people. Make sure you are flying at the right altitude. Please sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. You can find more about that in the description of this show. And if you ever want to jump on a discovery call with me, just email me, go to 4peaksparents.com, hit me up, and I'll be glad to help you fly at the right altitude. Have an amazing week, everybody. Take care. Be well. Bye. Hey everyone, Thomas here. First off, it means the world to me that you took the time to listen to my podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, If you want to receive the latest podcast updates, as well as expert parenting tips and practical strategies for navigating your tween, teen, or young adults challenges directly to your inbox, then sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the description. And most importantly, if you're tired of feeling overwhelmed, stuck, stressed, and are losing sleep because you're constantly worried about your tween, teen, or young adult, your first step is to realize that you still have a choice and can do something about it. I'm ready to help you take action and create the results you desire today. Just go to 4peaksparents.com and book a free strategy call. Let's do this. Last thing, while you were listening to this show, who was the one person that you thought could really benefit from hearing it? Please share it with them.